Hello friends, family, fellow patriots. Lord Stompy here, welcome. First of all, my apologies for not doing any videos lately. I've had a really bad cold. I've been coughing and sneezing a lot. I'll probably end up coughing during this video. I will try to make it through, so bear with me, thank you. Now, today's video I want to talk about the classic bait and switch tactic. Now, bait and switch is a tactic that's applied to a very broad range of situations here in the modern world. It's actually a tactic that's as old as time. So essentially, bait and switch is where a person or a group of people, they promise you something and they win your confidence and you give them all this support and you think, this is great. I'm going to get this thing that I want, and then at the last minute this person or this group, they change the thing that they're promising and they actually offer you something else. Quite often it's something you don't want. So basically this is a confidence trick, this tactic. It's a very classic Jewish tactic, and it's a classic tactic that's always used in modern politics as well as modern sales. So there's a few examples of bait and switch which I'll provide for you. One, say for instance in modern sales, a classic one is the used car dealer, and the guy who runs the used car dealership, he'll advertise a almost new, wonderful, bright red, mint condition Trans Am. All right, this wonderful sports car that's not got very many miles on the clock, and it looks really good. And he'll advertise it at a very good price. He'll say, "Oh, today only." You know, this getting quick, and you actually end up turning up at the car dealership and there's just some beaten up rusty brown Trans Am there instead, and the car dealer guy will say, well, if you got here 20 minutes ago, I had the wonderful brand new shiny Trans Am car here, but somebody else bought it. But look, here's this Trans Am that it's not too bad, and if you just spend a little bit of time and money doing it up, it's will be a really cool car. So that's a classic bait and switch. In the retail world, this bait and switch is also a standard part of basically a political strategy. So an example I can give here is back in the 1990s, here in Australia, there was a huge debate in Parliament about the implementation of the GST, or a goods and services tax. Now, before the 1990s, there was no goods and services tax in Australia. So when they introduced this, the majority of politicians were all for it, right? So suddenly we were paying tax on basically everything that we were buying, 10% tax. So the consumer was being taxed suddenly at 10% just for buying anything. And of course, the majority of Australians were against this. It was just seen as another way that the government was extending its power and also leeching more and more money out of us. And basically at the time, most politicians supported this and a minority stood against it. And with this minority of politicians who opposed the GST, there was a few who were very, very vocal in their opposition. And they really did their best to drum up a lot of popular support for themselves. They were like, yeah, I'm the champion of the people. I oppose this tyrannical GST. Get behind me. And essentially they won a lot of public confidence this way. And suddenly, when it came time to actually vote on implementing the GST, a few of these politicians who'd been the most vocal against the GST suddenly did an about face, and they said, well, we actually support the GST, but we want to argue for a limited form of the GST. We essentially we support it. We just think it's going too far. And so these politicians essentially won a huge amount of the public confidence. And then when it came time to vote on the GST, they actually tried to argue that essentially they were opposing the GST, but what they were opposing was a tyrannical version of the GST, and that a more limited version of the GST was very fair. And essentially what they wanted was a lot of public support, right? They did a bait and switch where they drummed up a lot of public support for themselves, and then at the last minute, when they basically changed their tune, they changed their policy, they tried to convince the public that essentially they were still on the public side, and they just opposed a tyrannical version of the GST, even though they'd capitulated. So this is a really standard part of political policy. Another politician here in Australia I can mention that has done exactly this same tactic is Pauline Hanson, a so-called right-wing nationalist. Now, 30 years ago when she came into power, she actually was very, hugely vocal and outspoken against immigration here into Australia. And to all intents and purposes, she seemed very right-wing. She ended up having a few problems, either in the late 90s or the early 2000s, where she got arrested and briefly jailed by the system on some... They essentially, there was some kind of a fraud charge, and she got a couple of months in jail. And when she came back out of jail, suddenly she she watered down her policies a lot, and she kept she kept trying to appear as if she was a hard right nationalist, but she began to really soften on the immigration issues and certain other issues. So essentially what it looks like there with Pauline Hanson was the system frightened her by arresting her for a short time, and basically they scared her into supporting the system, and they told her to keep behaving as if she was a nationalist when she's clearly not. So Pauline Hanson, for various reasons, is essentially she is a bait and switch. She originally she came in as a very strong nationalist, and now she's just a centrist conservative, and she's like, oh, immigration's okay, but just as long as we keep the numbers low, as long as it's only about 100,000 a year, that's all cool. So essentially this is bait and switch. It's a standard tactic, and it's something here in the modern world you've really got to keep your eye out for, because it's always being done. It's just such a standard tactic that it's basically in the Jewish playbook. It's basically the immoral move number one that you perform, whether you're in sales, whether you're in power, whether you're whatever. Promise the people one thing and win their confidence, and then deliver them something else. Now, bait and switch is actually here in the modern world now. There's some pretty sophisticated versions of bait and switch. So we've really got to keep our eyes and ears open for this. And as nationalists, we've really got to stick to our core beliefs. Because there's a lot of basically foreign agents, bad actors, whatever you want to call them, that at this point in time, the white nationalist movement, essentially we're the most infiltrated movement here in the West, because the one thing that our elites are really scared of is white nationalism gaining traction. Right? That's something the elites do not want to see happen. At all costs, this must be prevented. And on top of that, now that the West is fragmenting under all this immigration, there's all sorts of other foreign parties who have recently moved to the West, who are essentially they're foreign actors, right? But they're trying to align themselves with white nationalism. So an example of this is recently recently I saw a video by an Irish nationalist, and the video was titled "Ireland is Rising." Now, over in Ireland, there have been some very, very big rallies. There's been a lot of very vocal people out on the streets against immigration. This rally had tens of thousands of Irish patriots there. So essentially this Irish nationalist was interviewing patriots. At one point, suddenly into the video, an Indian woman came up and she was like, "Oh yes, I totally understand the Irish point of view, and I stand in solidarity with the Irish people." I'm like, yeah, well, what are you doing in their country? For a start, if you stand with the Irish against immigration, you should move back to India. Now, it doesn't take a genius to see what's going on here. Some of these foreigners are beginning to realise in certain Western countries, such as Ireland, that white nationalism is actually a huge force now, with a lot of public backing and a lot of momentum. So these immigrants are doing their best to align themselves with white nationalism. They're trying to give the appearance that they're on our side. And this is kind of a classic kind of a version of bait and switch, because essentially if the immigrants get the upper hand in Ireland, that Indian woman who appeared on camera saying, "I totally support the Irish," if the immigrants end up getting the upper hand, she would swap sides and support the immigrants and say, "Well, I'm an immigrant and I totally support the immigrants and immigration." So this is really something we white nationalists have to look out for. Everyone's trying to get a piece of our action. Everyone's trying to subvert us. Everyone's trying to deflect us. Now, here's an interesting little thing that happened to myself in the recent week. Was here on BitChute. For the last couple of months, I was unwittingly involved in a bait and switch. One of the BitChute channels, here on this platform. The name of the channel is Staged Chessboard. Okay, and this channel was posing as a white nationalist channel, and their main realm that they were focusing on was, for a number of months, this guy was looking at Asia through the lens of white nationalist politics. And he'd done a lot of deep research, this guy. This is actually quite a funny story when you hear what the bait and switch is, because the the guy's put in a lot of work and he's not going to get much success here, right? So essentially, for a number of months, this guy was basically mainly focusing on Japan. He did have a few videos on China and Korea, but he was saying white nationalists don't align with Japan or support Japan because these guys aren't as based as you think. And he'd done a lot of deep research that essentially he showed that Japan was a lot more compromised by the Jews even before World War II. And also Japan's heavily compromised by the Freemasons. To a large degree, the Jewish and Masonic compromising of Japan is, after World War II, is why Japan became uber liberal. Once Japan lost World War II, I mean, essentially, they had to capitulate to a form of Allied rule, really, essentially, since the end of World War II, to a large degree. Japan has been ruled by proxy by the Western powers. Now, some other interesting videos this guy did was Japan actually has in the modern era, even before World War II, Japan has a lot more links to Islam than Western people realise. And you know, these videos this guy was doing were very well researched, very interesting. There was a point around the time of the First World War where Japan wasn't sure whether modern Japan wasn't sure whether it should align with Western Christian power or whether it should align with Muslim Middle Eastern power. It wasn't entirely sure where it stood on the world stage, and Japan actually made quite a lot of overtures to the Muslim powers, and a big reason for this was the Muslim population of the world is really big, and at the time of the World War One, was the Ottoman Empire was still quite a valid thing. I mean, the Ottoman Empire, even though it was in decline, was still wielded a lot of power. So basically, Japan was making a lot of very friendly overtures to the Muslims. Now, here's where the bait and switch operation from Staged Chessboard comes in. So, you know, of all the foreign cultures, I've always had a passing interest in Japanese culture. As far as Asian culture goes, they're a high culture. You know, they're even when they spent hundreds of years isolated from the world. Essentially, you know, they were a very intelligent, interesting culture. Quite a lot of depth to their culture, and of all the Asian cultures, they're one of the most militaristic as well. Asians tend to be less militaristic than Western people and somewhat more effeminate, but Japan Japan always had a more militant, disciplined edge than a lot of other Asian cultures. So there's reasons why I like Japan, basically. Anyway, so getting back to this video. So finally, Stage Chessboard put up a whole series of videos on Japan and Islam and the secret history of Japan aligning with Islam that you didn't know about. Oh, I'm like, wow, didn't know about that. That's interesting. Suddenly, one of his most recent videos, he starts pointing out all the problems with Japan, and he's saying that modern liberalism has destroyed Japanese culture, and their birth rates are in decline, and all these things. And then he suddenly says, and the answer to fix this problem is to introduce Islam into Japan. Islam is a traditionalist religion that is based upon families and family values, and having a lot of discipline, and having a lot of pride in you. I was like, what? Essentially, this guy, Stage Chessboard, had been posing as a white nationalist for like months on end, like probably over a year. I've not gone really far back into his videos, but he made all this effort to pose as a white nationalist studying Japan. And he was saying, white nationalists don't align with Japan. Their culture is weak. They're much more liberal than you expect. Like immigration is beginning to really take its toll there. You can't rely on Japanese to stand firm and be nationalists alongside of you, right? And then next thing he's like, Japan should become Islam. And then in this video with his Japan should become Islamic, he actually had photos of Japanese women mixing race with Pakistanis and Middle Eastern Muslims, and basically producing little Asiatic niglet babies with these guys. I was like, I see. So white nationalists aren't allowed to have any access to Japan and to have any alignment with Japan. But Muslims, you're allowed to go in and miscegenate with their women and do whatever you like there. So that was very funny, because essentially Stage Chessboard was really playing to the white nationalist crowd for months on end. And then essentially his true colours come out, and he's actually a Muslim. So obviously this bait and switch that he's performed isn't going to be very successful, because not many white nationalists are going to go for Islam at the end of the day. It's not going to happen. So nice try from Stage Chessboard. He put in a lot of work. He really tried hard. But obviously the material that he's trying to push now that he's performed the bait and switch, is something that not many white nationalists will go for. Now, on a final stage, I will say that Islam in the West is having some limited success, really. And there's reasons for this. And I want to do a few more videos on this, but essentially, Stage Chessboard is right. Of all the major religions in the world, Islam tends to hold the most true to its traditional core values, and no matter which country it goes to, no matter where it goes. Now, when I was still a liberal, I saw this as the weak point of Islam. I saw it as a negative. I thought, well, those Muslims, they're stuck back in the Bronze Age, blah, blah, blah. And it wasn't until I became a nationalist that I began to think, wait a minute. Like, we Westerners have given up all our traditional values. We've given up our traditional culture, and now look at us. We're a dying people, and mostly because of this. Okay, so Islam essentially is doing something right on this front. It's able to hold itself together, and by holding to its traditional core values, no matter where it goes in the world, it's able to hold its people together. And this is the important point here, and because of this, there is some spillover into the Western nations that Islam is basically invading at this point in time. There is some spillover where a minority of Western people who essentially, at an instinctive level, they're aware that liberalism has destroyed their culture. A minority of Western people are turning to Islam because they believe that Islam is the answer. Okay, so even in Japan, Islam is still a very small religion, but at this point in time, it's the fastest growing religion in Japan. And this psychological mechanism I just said, the fact that liberalism is basically cultural Marxism. It's just a overarching force that destroys your traditional culture. That's exactly what liberalism is. It doesn't matter whether it's conservative liberalism or far left Marxist liberalism. It all destroys your culture. The only hope at the end of the day is traditionalism and nationalism. So what's happening here is, here in Western lands, because our culture has been so thoroughly destroyed by liberalism, is the minority of Western people who are waking up and trying to fix the problem. We're having to rebuild our culture from the ground up. Whereas Islam has come to our nations and held itself together very well. So what this means is Islam is already there as a well-formed group. It's a bulwark against liberalism and liberal values. Now, here in Australia, one of the most high-profile cases of an Australian that ended up converting to Islam was an Australian nationalist somewhere about 2016 or 2017. This nationalist called Sherman Burgess suddenly out of nowhere converted to Islam. Now, Sherman Burgess was a very well-known Australian nationalist. He promoted Hitler. He was really good friends with... now I forgot. He was really good friends with a lot of the top nationalists here in Australia. And then he just suddenly... stopped. He just suddenly essentially went rogue and became Islamic. So Blair Cottrell, he was really good friends with Blair Cottrell. So essentially what happened was Islam was here already. It arrived in our country with a very traditional structure and culture. And Sherman Burgess fell for this. He was like, well, I can just join these other people, and they've already got a very, very traditional structured society. And that's really something. There's a whole other video. I need to talk about all this. But anyway, bait and switch. Thank you very much, my friends, and we'll catch you soon. God bless.